There are coins that announce their importance the moment you see them. They are large, silver, beautifully detailed, and instantly recognizable. And then there are coins like this one, the 1932 British West Africa 1/10 penny. It is small, unusual, easy to overlook. And yet the moment you turn it over, something feels different. There is a hole in the center. There is a crown. There is a star-like design. There is writing in English and Arabic. And suddenly, this little piece of metal stops, looking like an ordinary coin, and starts looking like a message from another world. Imagine finding one today in an old collection, a box inherited from a relative, or among foreign coins purchased years ago. You might pick it up and think, what exactly am I looking at? That question is where our story begins. And stay with me, because one of the most interesting things about this coin isn't simply its age. It is the unusual way this denomination was designed, the history behind the region where it circulated, and the reason a coin made for everyday transactions can become so fascinating to collectors nearly a century later. Before we talk about price, rarity, or what your particular example might be worth, we need to understand the world that produced it. In 1932, British West Africa was a historical colonial region made up of territories that are now associated with several modern West African countries. The coinage used there was designed to work across that environment, and the British West African currency system included denominations that are very unfamiliar to modern American collectors. This was not an American penny, and it wasn't simply a British penny transported overseas. It was a denomination created specifically for British West African circulation. The 1932 issue was struck in London, and catalogue records identify it as a copper nickel coin weighing about 1.72 grams and measuring roughly 20.5 millimeters across, with a smooth edge and, most famously, a hole through the center. That hole is probably the first thing that catches your eye. Today, American collectors are used to seeing holes on certain foreign coins. But if you grew up looking mainly at United States cents, nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars, a tiny British West African denomination with a center hole immediately raises a question. Why would anyone deliberately manufacture a coin this way? And this is where the design becomes part of the story. The center opening wasn't an accident or a later alteration. It was built into the coin's original design. On one side, the coin carries the George V legend, with a crown positioned above the central opening in the denomination, expressed in English and Arabic. The reverse identifies British West Africa and features the distinctive star-like design surrounding the hole, while the date appears as part of the reverse design. Think about how unusual that would have looked to somebody handling it nearly 100 years ago. This wasn't just a little piece of metal with numbers stamped onto it. It had a design intended for a particular monetary environment, and the bilingual inscription tells us something important about the people and cultures connected to the currency. That small amount of Arabic lettering is one of the details collectors should never ignore when examining this coin. It is easy to focus on the date and miss the historical information sitting right in front of you. Now let's stop for a moment and imagine the year 1932. The world was living through the effects of the Great Depression. Technology, transportation, communication, and everyday life looked dramatically different from what we know today. There were no smartphones, no internet auctions, no online coin databases, and certainly no way for an ordinary person to instantly search the history of a coin with a few taps. A coin like this could pass from one person's hand to another without anyone thinking about the fact that decades later, collectors would be studying its design. Maybe it was used to make a small purchase. Maybe it sat in a cash drawer. Maybe it traveled through a market. Maybe someone carried it for years and eventually placed it aside. We cannot know the individual story of a surviving example, and that's important. Collectors should separate documented history from imagination. But we can say with confidence that this denomination was made for circulation, and its physical design reflects the monetary system of its time. The year 1932 is especially interesting because surviving catalog records list a mintage of approximately 3.20 million pieces for the regular issue. That number changes the conversation completely. 3.6 million is not the same thing as a handful of coins. So when someone sees a 1932 example and immediately assumes that its age automatically makes it extraordinarily rare, that's where caution is needed. Age alone doesn't create a huge value. A coin can be nearly a century old and still be relatively affordable if many examples survived and collector demand is limited. What makes the 1932 issue interesting is the combination of its lower mintage compared with some neighboring dates, its unusual design, its historical setting, and the condition of the individual coin. And now we reach one of the biggest secrets of old coin collecting. Condition can change the entire conversation. Two coins can have exactly the same date and denomination, but be dramatically different from a collector's point of view. Imagine one 1932 example that has spent decades being handled, scratched, rubbed, exposed to moisture, and tossed together with other coins. Now imagine another that survived with strong details, attractive surfaces, and very little wear. Technically, they are the same issue. Collectors, however, may view them very differently. This is why you should never look at a coin and say, "It's old, therefore it must be worth a fortune." Instead, ask better questions. How much detail remains? Are the inscriptions sharp? Is the date clear? Does the center hole have its original shape? Are there scratches, corrosion, cleaning marks, or damage? Does the surface still have an attractive original appearance? Those details can matter far more than simply saying 1932. There is another fascinating detail here. The coin's manufacture. The 1932 British West Africa 1 to 10 penny was produced at the Royal Mint in London. According to catalogue and museum records, the British Museum identifies the series as copper nickel and records the distinctive central hole, crown, Arabic inscription, and star design. That means when you hold one today, you're not simply holding something from an unknown old mint. You're looking at a piece of an organized monetary system connected to the British Empire, manufactured in Britain and intended for use thousands of miles away in West Africa. That connection between production and circulation is exactly the kind of detail that turns a small coin into a historical object. But let's talk about the question everybody eventually asks. What is a 1932 British West Africa 1/10 penny actually worth? Here's where we need to be realistic. Current catalog and price guide information gives only indicative values, and different sources can show different numbers depending on grade, market, and methodology. For example, Numismatics' current user-based estimates for the 1932 issue rise from around a few dollars in lower, circulated grades to higher single-digit figures in better grades, while NGC's published guide also shows values increasing with condition. Those figures should not be treated as a guaranteed selling price. A catalog estimate is not the same thing as an actual offer, and an auction result for one exceptional specimen does not establish the value of every 1932 coin. The honest approach is to treat these numbers as a starting point, and then evaluate the actual coin. This is one of the reasons I always tell collectors not to clean an old coin just because it looks dark or dirty. The temptation is understandable. You find something almost 100 years old. You want it to shine, and you think cleaning will make it look better. But aggressive cleaning can leave scratches or an unnatural surface, and collectors often prefer original-looking surfaces. So if you discover a 1932 British West Africa 1/10 penny, the safest approach is simple. Handle it carefully by the edges. Don't polish it, don't scrape it, and don't try to make it look brand new. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can preserve is the evidence of age itself. Now picture a completely ordinary discovery. Someone is sorting through a box of inherited coins. Most of the pieces are familiar. Perhaps old British coins, foreign change, and a few modern pieces. Then something small and strange catches their attention. It looks like a coin, but there's a hole through the middle. They turn it over and see a crown. They turn it again and notice Arabic lettering. Then they see the date, 1932. At that moment, the natural reaction is curiosity. Not necessarily. I've found a fortune. But what is this? That is the kind of discovery that makes collecting so addictive. The first reward isn't always financial. Sometimes the reward is finally understanding what you've been holding. And here's the lesser-known detail that makes this coin especially fun to discuss. The central hole isn't merely a decorative gimmick. It is part of a broader tradition of hole-centered coin designs that appeared in different parts of the world. And on this particular issue, it creates a visual layout that makes the crown, lettering, and surrounding symbols feel almost architectural. Instead of treating the center as empty space, the designers incorporated that empty space into the identity of the coin. The hole becomes part of the coin's design language. That's a subtle detail, but once you notice it, the coin looks completely different. The Arabic inscription deserves another moment because it reminds us that historical coins don't always speak only one language. On this denomination, the English denomination appears alongside Arabic script. For modern collectors, that makes the coin more than a British colonial artifact. It becomes a visual record of the multilingual environment in which the money was intended to function. You can almost read the coin as a tiny historical document. The British crown represents political authority. The English inscription identifies the monetary system. The Arabic lettering adds another linguistic layer, and the words British West Africa identify the broader issuing region. All of that information is compressed into a coin barely 2 centimeters wide. Now, if you're watching from the United States, you might wonder why a coin from British West Africa should matter to an American collector at all. The answer is simple. American collectors have long been interested in world coins, especially pieces that connect to major historical periods. The 1932 date itself sits inside a fascinating period of global history, and the coin's unusual appearance makes it easy to recognize in a collection. It also offers something American coinage doesn't normally provide: a center hole, bilingual lettering, and a colonial-era West African context. For someone building a world coin collection, those characteristics can make the piece much more interesting than its modest market value might suggest. Collector psychology plays a huge role here. Think about the difference between saying, "I own a $3 coin," and saying, "I own a 1932 British West Africa 1/10 penny made in London, with a hole through the center, issued under George V, and featuring both English and Arabic." The second description tells a story. Simarinaren feeders, Citran, collectors don't only collect metal. They collect history, design, scarcity, memories, and connections. A coin can be inexpensive but still be one of the favorite pieces in someone's collection because it opens the door to a historical subject they love. That doesn't mean every 1932 example is equally desirable. Far from it. If you're evaluating one, start with the basics. First, confirm the date. Second, confirm the denomination. Third, examine the central hole and make sure the shape looks consistent with the original design rather than something that has been altered. Fourth, study the inscriptions. Fifth, look carefully at the surfaces under good lighting. And finally, compare the coin with reliable references before making any decision about its value. If something appears unusually sharp, unusually well-preserved, or different from the standard design, that's when professional attribution can become worthwhile. You may also notice that there is some variation in published specifications. For example, the British Museum records examples around 20 millimeters in diameter and roughly 1.85 to 1.89 grams for related dated pieces, while modern catalog sources list the 1932 issue around 20.5 millimeters and 1.72 grams. Small differences in published measurements can occur because of source, methodology, individual coin variation, or differences between catalog records, which is another reason not to authenticate a coin from one measurement alone. A serious collector looks at the whole package: design, lettering, diameter, weight, metal, edge, date, and overall appearance. The George V connection adds another layer. The obverse legend identifies George V as king and imperial ruler, while the reverse carries the British West Africa identity. This was not merely a local token. It belonged to a broader imperial monetary system. And because coins travel, examples can eventually appear far from the places where they originally circulated. That is one reason a collector in the United States might discover one today. Now, let's talk about what can make a particular example stand out. Condition is number one. Sharp lettering and clean details are attractive to collectors. Original surfaces matter. A coin with heavy scratches, corrosion, harsh cleaning, or damage around the center hole can be less desirable. Provenance can sometimes add interest too, particularly if the coin comes from an established collection or has documented history. And unusual varieties or genuine errors can matter, but only if they can be verified. Never assume that a strange-looking mark is automatically a valuable mint error. Damage, wear, and post-mint alteration can create all kinds of unusual appearances. If you discover one, take clear photographs of both sides, preferably in natural or neutral lighting, and record the weight and diameter without damaging the coin. Compare the design with reputable references. If you believe you have something unusual, seek an experienced numismatist or professional grading service, rather than relying on a random social media comment. That's especially important if someone is telling you that your coin is worth an enormous amount of money. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. So where does the 1932 issue sit among the surrounding dates? The mintage information gives us an interesting comparison. The 1931 issue is listed at about 9.84 million, while 1932 is around 3.6 million, and 1933 rises again to about 7.2 million. In other words, 1932 was produced in a noticeably smaller quantity than the neighboring 1931 and 1933 regular issues. That doesn't automatically make it rare, but it helps explain why collectors may pay more attention to the date. The important distinction is between lower mintage and rare. Those are not identical terms. This distinction is something every new collector should learn. A coin can have a low mintage but still be readily available because many pieces survived. Another coin can have a much larger mintage but become difficult to find in excellent condition. That's why experienced collectors look beyond the original production number. They ask how many examples are believed to survive, what grades exist, how many collectors want the coin, and how frequently good examples appear on the market. And that brings us back to the United States. The American market for world coins is broad, but demand is not evenly distributed. A famous U.S. rarity can attract enormous attention, while a relatively obscure colonial coin may have a smaller audience. For the 1932 British West Africa 110 penny, the strongest appeal is likely to come from world coin collectors, British Commonwealth specialists, African history enthusiasts, and collectors interested in unusual coin designs. That doesn't mean there is no American demand. It means the market is specialized, and specialized markets tend to reward knowledge more than hype. There's also an educational value here. A young collector seeing this coin for the first time might start with one simple question. Why does it have a hole? That question can lead to a study of world coin design. Then comes the Arabic lettering, leading to questions about language and regional circulation. Then George V, then British West Africa, then the history of the 1930s. A single tiny coin can become the starting point for an entire research journey. That is one of the best things about numismatics. Now imagine the coin sitting on a table under a bright light. You rotate it slowly. The metal catches the light around the central opening. The crown becomes visible. The lettering appears. The star-like design surrounds the whole. And for a moment, the coin doesn't look old. It looks alive with information. That's what I love about pieces like this. They don't need a sensational price tag to be fascinating. Could a particularly exceptional example be worth more than the ordinary guide values? Certainly, depending on grade, eye appeal, rarity of a particular variety, provenance, or market circumstances. But that is exactly why we shouldn't promise a fixed value. The market changes, auction results vary, and individual coins are different. Current reference. Sources show the 1932 issue in the low dollar to higher single-digit range depending on grade, but those are indicative figures rather than guarantees. If you own one, the right question isn't, how can I make this worth thousands? The right question is, what exactly do I have? That change in mindset is powerful. Instead of chasing a fantasy number, you start investigating. You look at the date. You inspect the lettering. Maybe it isn't worth a fortune. Maybe it's a modestly priced collectible. Maybe your particular example is unusually well preserved. Maybe it has damage that reduces its market value. Maybe further research reveals a detail you didn't notice at first. Whatever the answer, you have something that survived from another era, and that alone makes the discovery worth investigating. Here at HF Coins World, that's what we love about old coins. Sometimes the most exciting discovery isn't the coin with the biggest price tag. It's the coin that makes you stop, turn it over, and ask a question you've never asked before. The 1932 British West Africa 1 to 10 cent or 200 T10 penny does exactly that. It takes a tiny piece of copper nickel, gives it a hole in the center, surrounds that hole with symbols and language, sends it into a world that no longer exists, and somehow allows it to return almost a century later to tell us part of its story. So before you leave, take a look at the coins around you. Check the old foreign pieces sitting in a family collection. Look through that box you've been meaning to organize. You might not find a fortune, and we should never assume you will. But you might find something much more interesting. A coin with a story you never knew was there. If you enjoyed this journey through the 1932 British West Africa 1/10 penny, subscribe to HF Coins World for more real coin history, unusual discoveries, and collector-focused stories. And the next time an old coin catches your eye, don't dismiss it too quickly. Turn it over. Look closer. Sometimes history is hiding in the smallest places.